Can you talk about how you got into your journey, just like researching performance anxiety? Like, how did you start that journey?
Um, well, it's something that was always interesting to me because it's something that I always experienced. I always experienced the physical manifestations of performance anxiety. I would get uh, fluttery, breath, nervous stomach, shaky limbs, these kinds of things. So, I mean, that was something that was very strong primal link for me. And it actually wasn't what I originally was going to do for my dissertation. I had this kind of large project kind of thing planned out that I wanted to do, and it just, for one reason or another, it wasn't going to come to fruition. And so I decided to shift to a more research-based topic, and this was something that was so obviously prevalent for me, even though it didn't affect my ability to perform as far as what other people saw.
Hmm.
No one would ever guess that I would have experienced that. It didn't stop me from getting out there and putting myself out there and doing professional work in any way, but it's certainly something that I experienced and that I felt very deeply. And it really gave me this whole kind of love-hate relationship with performance.
Yeah.
It was it was fun to have the experience, and it was fun to invest in the artistry of that experience. But those feelings that manifested physiologically were certainly not something I enjoyed. So I became really interested in putting together a body of work that talked about what was going on, why it was going on, and what we could do about it. What the coping strategies were. So that's how that body of work came into being, and it was a fascinating foray into how the brain works, which I really didn't expect as much. I didn't realize it was going to be something that I would learn so much and would become so much a part of my work going forward from doing that. But it most certainly has. Learning about how the brain works and why we do certain things or think certain things in certain situations, I think is integral to all of our work for everything. So, it became something that served me much farther in life than just, with performance and performance anxiety itself.
Why do you think that this is something that people don't talk about more and that there's not more research?
Oh, because it's a taboo subject, because especially in a world where competition
Hmm.
is at the forefront, or so people think. I mean, I could talk to you a lot about why I don't believe in that and why I think that that's again, that's just a primal way of thinking that's no longer necessary. But it's still very much alive in us, even if unconsciously. And there is this fear that if we admit that we experience something like performance anxiety or anything, people have the same issues with learning disabilities they have, or mental health issues. All of these things are things that people, especially in a world where competition is very prevalent, in whatever industry you're in. It's almost in everything, or so people think. People are scared to death to admit, talk about, seek help for anything like that, because it's like holding up a big sign that says I have a weakness.
Hmm.
There are things that other people may not have an issue with that I have an issue with, and people don't want to point that out. They're afraid that pointing out that weakness is going to somehow uneven the playing field for them when it comes to being able to excel, be approved of, be chosen for things, whatever.
Yeah.
So people don't want to talk about it. They don't want to admit it. They don't. When you do something, about the subject matter, a lot of times people either won't show up because they don't want to come into that room and be, because they feel like that's an admittance of like, oh, I need to learn about this. I need to know about this. Or there's a high desire for anonymity. No one's going to know I'm taking this course, right? No one's going to, the very first course I did on this, I actually got a lot of emails from people before they would commit to doing it, asking me that, like, no one's going to know I'm in this, right? Will anyone know? No one can know my answers to things. Like, I'm like, no one's going to know unless you tell them.
So then can you talk about what is performance anxiety and why does it happen?
Well, performance anxiety is simply the presence of psychological, emotional, or physiological symptoms that manifest as a result of feeling threatened in some way. And why it happens really stems back to that primal coding in our DNA that if we are not accepted or approved of by others, that is actually a gateway to the end of our mortality. That's a recipe for death. That's a death sentence. Back in the old times of dinosaurs and stuff like that. If you are not accepted by the group and they cast you out, then your chances of surviving in the wild by yourself were slim to none. It was almost impossible, and people knew that. Yeah. So the ability for you to kind of walk to the beat of your own drum and do what you want and not really kind of fall in line was a very, very dangerous choice to make. And we also see it in herd mentality with animals, right? If you see a herd of animals all together, we know that just because of the way nature works, that a predator is going to look for the animals that are on the outside of the herd, the ones that are not paying attention, the ones that are weaker. And so the herd instinct, that primal herd instinct, is to like get in the middle and lump together with everybody else. Don't look like you're by yourself. Yeah. Don't be individual and unique. And so when you put those two things together, you could see why there is a fear of nonconformity, which is counterintuitive for what people specifically in artistic endeavors are taught. You're taught, oh, you need to stand out, you need to be unique, but then also, you need to dress like this and you need to look like this and you need to do this particular stuff and it has to sound like this. And so it's a very confusing mixed message, I think. And the industries themselves tout both of those. They will the one and the same person will tell you that you need to be unique and stand out, and then also to conform to the standards of the industry. So it's extremely confusing, and people are often, especially when they grow up in that environment, they're left wondering, well, who do I listen to? I mean, as far as why if you look at all the different reasons that that people experience the symptoms and the thoughts that they do, it all boils down to fear of acceptance or fear of approval of others. Everything. Judgment is nothing more than, if you're afraid of being judged by someone, that boils down to whether or not you're approved by them, right? Whether or not they accept you. So you can use whatever words you want to, it's going to come back to that. Right.
A lot of our students express that this happens to them going into a test, or also we do sight singing exercises, and, they'll feel a lot of fear just going into a sight, even though, we're not evaluating their vocal performance,
sure.
They're just wanting to get the right notes, and sometimes that, sure, will cripple them. So I guess that boils down to the same thing then, right?
Yeah, it's because, especially, it starts at a young age, and it's just kind of the way that we're taught. If you kind of look at the way that we all grow up as humans, when you're young, I'm talking like 4, 5, you're taught to express, you dance in the grocery store, you sing songs and everyone says, isn't that cute? And that kind of, freedom of expression is encouraged in children. And it's kind of, seen as something that's entertaining, and it's certainly not seen as an issue.
Yeah.
But as we get older, we start getting a different message, right? One of the first messages we get as we start to get older is that there are certain things that are okay in public, and there are certain things that are not.
Mm-hmm. So I wonder if that contributes then to the herd mentality to try and oppress people who stick out, because
absolutely. We become, if you think about it, as a society, we're very interesting. Because we like a certain level of standing out in nonconformity. We see this especially in our pop star icons, actors, actresses, things like this in the entertainment field. We like a certain level of nonconformity, but not too much. If it gets to be too much, people start getting nervous. So it's okay when there's like a select few people doing it, but when they start to see it in their everyday world, they'll say it's fine for this pop star person who's not actually in their world, but is out there in society. But if it starts showing up in their world, they'll shut it down real fast.
Yeah. So how then does performance anxiety manifest? I know that physically, the majority of people said shaky voice, shaky legs, weaker sound. Some sort of shakiness in yeah. And then secondary, people running out of breath, like the throat closing, dry mouth, heart racing, sweaty hands, cracking. And then I also thought it was interesting, avoiding eye contact was something that I didn't think about, but is something that we kind of do instinctively. So how and why do these manifest, and how is that part of performance anxiety?
The physiological symptoms I find to be fascinating. So when we have nervous, shaky hands, shaky knees, shaky limbs, stuff like this, what's actually happening is that there's been some sort of a trigger response. There's been some sort of an awareness factor in the brain that tells us we are about to enter, or we are in a situation that could be potentially life-threatening, even though it's totally not. There's, like I said, that primal coding in our DNA makes us feel like, even if we're just standing in front of somebody or just saying hello and saying our name in a group, that somehow is linked to that acceptance, approval, survival. So once that trigger has gone off, right? Once the amygdala in the brain has been like danger, right? And sends this little signal off to us, depending on the person, because some people have a stronger primal link to that than others. Mine's really strong. Some people just notice it, and they may get a little nervous, but they don't have nearly that's why some people get, like really strong symptoms. Sometimes some people don't get them at all. And it really deals with how strong that primal link is. And when it comes to the shaking of the limbs, this is directly related to the body preparing to take off. People always say fight or flight. And when they think about it like that, it makes you think in your brain that like the first instinct is to fight. And then if that doesn't work, you should run away. And that's not what happens at all. There's actually 4 levels that happen. And the first is freeze. If you've ever been in the woods and you're walking in the woods and you hear a noise, some sort of crackling of something, that something's being stepped on or something rustling in the trees, whatever, the first thing you do is what?
Freeze.
Exactly. You stop moving. You just stop in time and you start listening real hard, right? That's always first, right? If we feel after freezing, you have 2 choices, right? Number 1, you feel like, okay, there's not a threat, I can continue. Or I'm going to continue, but cautiously. I'm going to continue to look around, a little bit more heightened awareness than where I was a minute ago, right? Or that feeling of imminent threat intensifies. So if it intensifies, what is your next reaction? Get out. Run. Right? So flight is next in line. It's freeze and then flight. Get out, run away, avoid, abort, And this is why we feel oftentimes when we're going, when people want to do an audition or something like that, their first reaction isn't like to get in there and fight their way through it. Their first reaction is to not go.
Yeah.
Turn around, walk out. I don't want to go on the stage. They kind of like back up like this. And it's because flight is second, not fight. Fight only happens once flight doesn't work. So fight happens if, and again, we're in the woods. Okay, we've started taking off. Something is chasing us, and you're not going to be able to outrun it.
Yeah.
Your only option at that point is to turn around and to try to fight it off.
Right.
That's it, right? Or just give up. So fight is next. And then the fourth step in that is fright. And fright, and we've seen this in animals all the time. We see it mimicked by especially small creatures like insects. We see it all the time. When it is poked or prodded, what does it do? It just turns around and lays there and pretends like it's dead. And so the instinct is to go into a paralytic state of fright, where you mimic already being dead. Mm. And so, and we can see how we can go through those stages, and people who've experienced this may have been through all those stages. Freeze is really that just kind of awareness. It can also feel like you're hesitating on yourself. Mm. Flight is that feeling that your brain just wants to go anywhere else. It's where the physiological symptoms start to manifest. And now I'll go back to your question about that. So if we're in flight mode and you're in a real survival situation, the body becomes a completely different machine. Mm-hmm. All of the physiological mechanisms in the body shift their responsibilities. So we think about muscles as being things that we build from like working out or running or, doing these kinds of things, which is true. It does. However, we don't realize oftentimes that muscles have the ability to contract themselves down and then spring out into action. And we see animals do this, like deer and rabbits and stuff like that. We see them do that, but we don't realize that we also as humans can do it. And it's what gives us that ability, the adrenaline starts pumping immediately, the muscles contract, and then we spring. And that's how, anytime you've been really scared, you're like, wow, I jumped into a chair and I don't even know how I got there. Yeah. Or, like I climbed up out of that thing so fast, like I don't even know how I did that. And it has to do with that shot of adrenaline that gets released into the body and then that contraction of muscles. Mm-hmm. So the shaky limbs, because you're not actually like leaping into, some sort of, survival mode, the muscles start to contract and we feel it happening. Mm. Normally what would happen is they would contract and immediately we would release them because we would take off and run. But you're not doing that. You're like waiting your turn, to take your test or to, exactly. So you're not doing that. And so you feel those little micro contractions like that. And what's interesting is that most people think the way to get rid of that is to try to stand still, but that actually makes it worse.
That's so interesting because a lot of people have said that their symptoms of performance anxiety decrease when they get more into acting, right? And they act out. And I wonder if part of that is motion related and then maybe also the mental distraction.
Sure. Yeah. I tell anybody, if you start to feel shaky limbs, shaky knees, anything like that, what you need to do is get into gross motor movement, not fine motor movement, right? Fine motor movement, small stuff that we do. When we stand and sing, that's 99% fine motor movement, right? We're dealing just with stuff, inside, internally in the mechanism, and we move, minimally on the outside. So I always tell people, stand up, do like deep knee bends, lift your knees, do jumping jacks, big arm swings, stuff like that. Big and gross motor movement will help to release the musculature tension that's building up from, your body thinking that you're going to need to spring into action. And even if somebody is in a performance or that, they're like, they've gotten on stage and they're feeling like that, I will encourage them to do things like, like reach far back on the piano, as opposed to staying really close to it like this, like reach far back, put your arms out, do a larger gesture, bend into, like lean toward one knee, anything that's going to involve the body in kind of larger, more expansive movements, to try to incorporate those as appropriate. But to do that, because if you try to stand still and try to like make yourself not be shaky, you actually make it worse. You're actually putting more tension into the body. So it's almost impossible to release. Yeah, exactly. You can't do that. You can't control it like that. The other things that happen, the digestive system shuts down because you do not need to be digesting food. And dealing with digestion when you're running for your life, right? So this is why the gastric juices in the stomach shut down and you start to feel queasy in your stomach.
Wow.
Particularly if you have a little bit of food in your stomach, because now it's not being digested by gastric juices anymore. It's just sitting there, and that kind of makes you feel a little ucky. That's why you get dry mouth, because the salivary glands are attached to the digestive system. And so once the digestive system shuts down, so do the salivary glands. So that's why people get dry mouth. This is why people also tend to need to go to the bathroom when they get nervous. Like they're like, oh, I have to go pee. You know, people, there's 3 ways that people can exit, you know, things from their system, right? You can pee, you can poo, and you can barf. And, you know, I've had people tell me that they've, you know, one of those 3 things they feel like they have to do, you know, before they do something that's making them nervous. And it's because the body has triggered that system to eliminate anything that's going to weigh us down, right? All of those things in the body, what we carry in our bowels, what we carry in our bladder, what we carry in our stomach, is just extra weight. At that point. And we certainly don't need it. So the body says, hey, get rid of that. Heart rate speeds up because it needs to pump blood and oxygen throughout all the limbs, you know, in order to make sure that as you're running, it keeps up with, of course, you're not actually running, which is why it feels so awkward. Right? It's trying to make sure that it keeps up with you. The temperature raises because everything is moving faster in the body. Hands start to get sweaty and clammy. Feet get cold and hands get cold, because as the body is pumping more blood and moving at a higher pace, it's also withdrawing the blood from the limbs. Because if you're in a survival situation, the chances of one of your limbs getting cut off first is much higher. And so your body is actually trying to save blood and make sure, trying to save blood and make sure that you don't have huge blood loss if something should cut your arm off or bite your arm off. And so the concentration of the blood in the body stays within the torso and in the head to make sure that you're getting what you need, but not out where you might lose it and cause you to bleed out and die before you can get away. The eyesight changes, because when you are running for your life, you don't need to see close up. You need to see far in the distance. You need to see where you're running to. So many times people have complained that they can't see the music anymore. Wow. You know, they're holding music and they're like, I can't even see it. I can't see the words. I can't see what I'm doing. And that's because the eyesight has shifted to farsightedness. And anything that you're holding in front of your face is not a priority anymore. People may have noticed if they've experienced it, that they speak really quickly. So they'll start saying, oh, my name is so-and-so, I'm going to sing such and such. Or they'll start a tempo of a piece and it'll be like twice as fast as they normally do it. Yeah. That's because the brain waves are actually speeding up. There's a hyperactivity in the brain also to help you think more quickly and execute decision making more quickly. Yeah. You know, should I go over here? Should I go over there? Should I climb this tree? Should I keep running? Do I need to go in here? Should I go in that hole? So there's a reason behind every single one of the physiological symptoms that we experience, and it's all related back to that primal instinct that we're somehow being threatened in a survival sense, and the body needs to react accordingly.
Right. So many people have said that they get far more nervous in a one-on-one situation, you know, maybe a one-on-one audition, than they do in front of a crowd. And one student said they felt like this was because in the audition, they had received like the validation of, I made it through the audition. And now that I'm in the performance, I have that underlying validation and I'm performing for a larger group of people, maybe people with less critical ears. But does the one-on-one thing have something to do with it? Is it the perception of the person that you're singing for, or maybe a combination of both?
Yeah, it definitely can. It's all perception.
Right.
You know, it's all perception. It's also perception of hierarchy. Some people wouldn't get nervous singing in front of a 5-year-old, but would get nervous singing in front of a college professor. Wouldn't get nervous singing in front of their grandmother, but would get nervous singing in front of someone who could hire them. Wow. So it's perception of, again, it's perception of acceptance and approval, right? If I don't care in my mind if a 5-year-old likes what I sing or say or not, or I know that like grandma's always going to tell me that they, you know, thought it was wonderful. then I might not feel that acceptance approval pressure nearly as much as someone who can give me a job or not, or is a professional who knows the business and would be able to tell me in their opinion. I would hold at a greater value because I know that they know what's out there, as opposed to grandma who maybe doesn't know. She doesn't know the industry. I'm just using that as an example. I mean, I'm sure some people's grandmas are pretty savvy, and may be involved in that world. Or maybe there's also people, whose parents or family members are highly critical as well. It's not always that case. So it depends. Some people have a real problem singing in front of their parents, but not in front of their teachers. Mm-hmm. So it depends on your perception of where that hierarchy of value is concerned. Yeah. The one-on-one can be, again, it's perception, right? If it's one person against one person, I only have one chance to be accepted and approved of. Wow. So if I'm looking at it from that perspective, then whatever happens in this room is really important. Yeah. The need to please, the need to show what you can do, the need to be right, the need to appear intelligent, all these kind of things come to the forefront. If I feel like if that person is disappointed, doesn't accept me, doesn't approve, and again, we don't think about like, oh, does my teacher accept me? We don't think about it in that way in our brains, but that's exactly what's happening unconsciously. Then yes, that can be a big deal. Other people may see that as a safety point. It's just one person. I know this person, this person's here to help me. And while that's, 99% of the time that is what's happening, if that's not your perception, it doesn't matter. Mm. Same thing with the audience. If you think about being on a battlefield, right? And it's you and 100 people facing you. Okay, that doesn't feel very good, odds-wise, that you're going to come out ahead in a situation. Right. So that primal setup of one against many is something that can be very triggering for people as well. Now, when it comes to being in a show, you're right. There is, for a lot of people, the perception of, well, I already got hired, so there's validation there. Yeah. I don't have to try to be accepted because I already was. Mm. But for other people, they'll feel like, well, yeah, I got accepted, but this is a whole new group of people. And it'll feel like that every single night because opening night was a group of people, but tonight is also a whole new group of people. Yeah. There's also the issue for many people that the better they get, the more nervous they get. Interesting. So people always think that fear of failure is the biggest part of one of the biggest reasons that we have performance anxiety, but it's actually fear of success is equal. In its issues. And the reason for that is that many people feel that once they have gotten to a certain level, once they have been accepted at something, once they have done something a certain way, that they must be at that level or better the next time, or people are going to feel like they were somehow a fake, a fraud, they don't deserve to be there. How did they even get their position? Why are they at that status? What's so special about them? And so there becomes this big fear that like, I can never, ever go backward. Yeah. Like I said, for someone who's thinking about it and like, I did an audition, I got a part, and now I'm be seen by audience. In their minds, it's like, well, I got accepted, so now I better be good. Or else. And so there's a pressure on them to have to be good and right in order to prove that they are worthy of the spot that they received. Yeah. Right. For other people, it could be something simple as, improving in a lesson or singing a solo and everybody giving them a lot of praise, right? Oh man, that was so great. Or yes, do that. That's exactly what you want to do. That's what I'm going to expect from now on. And so they're happy about that moment, but the next time they get out there, they realize the bar was set. Mm. And if they don't meet or exceed that bar, that there's going to be disappointment. There's going to be less approval. And so it becomes a huge pressure in that way. Kids who make straight A's or, in grades wise, have that pressure a lot of times that like, oh, well, I made straight A's last semester, or well, I've always made straight A's. So if I don't make straight A's again, then, you know, everyone's going to think that, you know, like, oh, well, I'm not as smart as, you know, they thought, or my parents are going to be disappointed, or maybe I think I'm not as smart as I thought, or there's all kinds of reasons that puts that kind of fear level. And that kind of goes back to what you were talking about for the test taking, right? Like if I take a test and I get a grade that's lower than a certain level that I have in my mind that's acceptable, I either allow that to affect my own self-worth, self-esteem. My parents are going to be disappointed. The teacher's going to think I'm not smart anymore, or that I don't, you know, that I don't take things seriously. You know, people are going to see my grade in the class and think that I'm just mediocre, I'm average. There's all this kind of pressure. If I don't get, you know, if I don't get high enough grades, I won't get into AP classes, or I won't get into honors, or I won't get into college, and then what am I going to do? And so this, it just builds and builds and builds. Yeah, exactly. That, that somehow this piece of paper, right, that's going to get some things marked on it with some ink and a number or a letter put on it is somehow going to decide our fate for the rest of our lives. Yeah. And while things do have consequences, you know, everything that we do has consequences. The amount of value we put on those consequences is sometimes severely warped. Right? Like if we make a mistake in front of other people, it's not the end of our world. You know, we choose oftentimes because of that fear of, you know, lack of acceptance and fear of lack of approval. We attach embarrassment and shame onto making mistakes in front of others. But if you think about it, anytime you've ever been in a public situation and you've seen someone make a mistake and they take it in stride, they're like, oh, that was me. Sorry about that, you guys. Can we do that again? I missed that. We feel this sense of admiration for that person. No one looks at that person and goes like, oh, you know, loser. Like people don't do that, you know, they're like, it's almost like this awe, this kind of amazement or admiration that the person didn't like get defensive or, you know, get embarrassed, or which is, you know, the repressive and reactive natures that we normally have when we do something like that. Repressive is to feel shame, to feel embarrassed, to want to shrink away, run away, you know, sorry, that kind of thing. It's repressive. Reactive is to get angry, defensive, frustrated, you know, things like that. That's typically what happens. But there's that third option as well, which is to just allow that to be a part of process, and to realize that process comes with mistakes and experimentation and exploration, and that's okay. And when we learn from that, when we acknowledge that and we're okay with it and we learn from it and we're able to move on, then we don't get caught up in the resistance of, you know, repression or reaction.
Then comes the question, how do you get to that mindset, you know, whether it's in test taking or performing on stage? How do you overcome both the physical and mental manifestations, which might be like your mind going blank, or just the what ifs, like you said?
The physical symptoms are, like I said, that's really coded in our DNA. That's primarily linked, and you may have less of them over time. You may not. You know, you may still experience those in a way, but your reaction to them is something that can shift. You don't have to be afraid of that. You don't have to be worried about it. It's something that you can see as being fascinating. It's something you can kind of delight in the nature of the human, you know, and kind of see as just kind of like this funny little phenomenon that we have, that even though we're no longer in those situations, you know, and it's important that we still have that too. That link to our survival mode is important. I mean, it's the thing that keeps you from doing stupid stuff that could get you killed, like walking out in the middle of the street, you know, and stuff like that. I mean, it's there for a reason. Yeah. And so to say that it's bad or you want to get rid of it forever is really kind of just naive thinking. It's really much more important to see it for its necessity and to honor and value it for that, but then also to have compassion for yourself when it shows up, in times where it's not really necessary.
Mm.
And sometimes it just comes back to just talking to yourself and saying, is this one of those times? Is this really a survival situation? What am I going to do? Sing some notes, sing 8 measures of notes I haven't seen before. And if you look at it logically like that, what we're really doing is just detaching ourselves from the emotion of it. If we can do that, then we can ask ourselves those logical questions. Is this a true survival situation? What's the worst possible outcome? Sit down ahead of time. If you know it's a situation you'll normally get nervous about, sit down and ask yourself, what is the worst possible outcome? Okay. If you're sight reading something, okay, you like obliterate it. It's just horrible. You miss all the notes, your teachers tell you you're terrible, I mean, that's pretty much the worst thing that can happen, right? So you don't get into the choir you want to get into. People tell you have no chance of, having any sort of musical future. I mean, this is the worst of the worst case scenario. Then we need to ask ourselves, okay, on a scale of 1 to 10, 10 being absolute imminent threat of survival and 1 being no actual threat of survival, where does that come in? Okay, 1.
Yeah.
No one's going to die here.
Yeah.
Right, exactly. No one's going to die here if we slaughter this sight reading example.
But it feels like social death, maybe, if you don't
add it to the worst case scenario. So maybe it's a little higher, right?
Yeah.
Maybe it's a little higher. Maybe it feels like a 3 or 4 to that person.
Yeah.
If that's the case, fine. What are the potentials if we do well? What are the potentials if we do the best preparation that we can and that we do well? Okay. And then we look at that scale 1 to 10. 10 being, great potential for things and 1 being no potential. Where do we, maybe we, like I said, we, get to advance in what we're doing, whatever. Fine. And the question is, does your potential gain outweigh your loss? Does your love outweigh your fear? Does your excitement for what is possible outweigh your fear? It really boils down to that. So you have to start thinking about it in that way and asking yourself those kinds of logical questions. It boils down to 2 things, logic and love. And it's a self-love. And I know that sounds really kind of mushy and corny, but the older you get, the more you realize how very important that is, and how self-compassion and self-love and self-understanding is actually the foundation for everything you're going to do in your life, no matter what it is. I don't care what you do. And if you don't have that, then you will suffer. You will have to get to a point where you either figure that out, or you either won't be happy or satisfied, or you'll just live in fear of some form. And fear takes many forms. And so if you are thinking about it on that plane, then when you start to feel those things, you start to recognize them and understand them for what they are, and to have patience with yourself and self-compassion, and to do the little things that you can do, like gross motor movement, big, large motor movement. For breathing techniques, you can do, slow down your breathing. I like to, encourage people to try alternate nostril breathing. Close one nostril off, breathe in through your nose. Switch. Breathe out the other side. Breathe in the same side. Switch. Breathe out. And then you breathe in that side, so on and so forth, back and forth. That immediately slows down heart rate, helps blood pressure to decrease, helps slow down the mind, slows down the breathing mechanism. So because, the breathing speeds up because we're trying to oxygenate the body faster, because muscles need oxygen in order to burn energy. So that's why we start breathing more heavily and more quickly when we get nervous. So that helps slow all that back down. And so when you know those coping mechanisms and you employ those in place, you do the due diligence ahead of time. Do the work to be prepared. Because that's another thing that contributes to that anxiety, is that I'm not prepared. I'm not ready for this. So if you don't give yourself enough preparation time, and that's different for every person, right? Some people can do things on really short notice and do really fine. Other people can't. And there's nothing wrong with that. It's just knowing yourself and knowing what your strengths are and knowing what your limitations are, and not feeling bad about that.
I think there's a lot of shame around the idea of like, this is harder for me than for
yeah,
them.
like, who cares?
Yeah.
Yeah, it doesn't matter. I mean, that's part of just, I mean, there's like a million reasons that those things happen. It's part of our DNA. It's part of the way we're brought up. It's part of our, social conditioning. It's part of our environments. It's part of the way, our brains work uniquely in some ways. What it boils down to is it doesn't matter. It doesn't matter that this person's, quicker orally than you are. It doesn't matter that this person can read faster than you can, or that you can jump farther than this person. Like, that doesn't matter. It's about really being aware of what our differences are and accepting them and acknowledging them and really appreciating them and appreciative of others for the things that they can do. We only use competitiveness and hierarchy to try to help ourselves figure out where we fit in.
Is that why people will say, picture the audience naked? Because it's trying to like decrease them in the hierarchy?
Yes, it's trying to put others below you in a state of vulnerability, because they think that, I feel very vulnerable on stage right now. And so if I imagine that other people are more vulnerable than me, then I'll feel better. And that's why it really doesn't work, because it's like you're trying to push other people down. Unconsciously, it's about saying, I'm going to push other people down in order to lift myself up. And that's just another
the audience.
Yeah, it's just another fear-based way of thinking. Instead of thinking about, these people are, no one's here to see you fail. Yeah. Like, no one. There's not, people don't come to a show to say, oh, I hope the lead fails. No one does that. Those people are there to really to just forget about their lives for a little while and to laugh and cry and to be invested in you. So if you're afraid to invest in yourself and in them, then what you're really doing is just robbing yourself and others of just this beautiful opportunity of exchange. That's all you're doing. And isn't that a shame? Isn't that a shame? That's what I tell people about going to auditions. I'm like, you're not there to be accepted. You're not there to get a job. You're not there to win. I mean, that may be the result, and that's fine. But it's not what you're there for. You're there because you have an opportunity during those 30 seconds or 2 minutes or 5 or 10 minutes, whatever it is, to connect with those other people that are in the room and to kind of take them on a little journey of your artistry just for that moment, And if you did that, then you've done your job, And if that means that they invite you to do something further, great. And if it doesn't, that's fine. That's fine. When the percentages of things are, 10% or lower, in many cases lower, why on earth would you think that if you don't get accepted that you've somehow failed? And that's a perception flaw. It's not failure. It's only failure if you think that the only way of being successful is to get something in return. What you're basically saying is, I'll let you into my heart and soul. I'll share with you, I'll connect with you, but only if I get something for it.
Wow.
Wow, really? Is that what being an artist is about to you? If that's the reason that you give, if that's the reason that you share, if that's the only way you're willing to be vulnerable, it's sad. I mean, you're going to miss out on a lot of really amazing opportunities and special moments. Not just for other people, but for yourself. Yeah. You can't do it because you're going to get something in return. And you can't do it to try to please other people. You have to do it because of something intrinsic, something inside you that says, what can I do with this? How can I explore this? What can I make from this? How can I share this? What would I like to do with this? When you're coming from that kind of place of doing it for the sake of doing it because you want to see what you can do, the whole process of acceptance, approval, and competition and stuff just goes away. You realize that that's just not important anymore. What's important is the actual act of creating in that moment. And whether it's quote unquote good or not is really subject to people's opinions. I mean, think about it. Anytime you've heard a singer or looked at a piece of art or something, you're going to have people that say, oh, I love her, I love him, and say, oh, I love that piece of art. And people be like, that's hideous. Like, I hate it, you know? And it's like, that's what art is. It's a person's creative expression, and some people are going to like it and other people are not. And to understand that that's okay, and that you will be so much freer to express and create when you don't have that contingency as part of your motivation. That I will express and create, but only if everyone likes it. I will express and create only if it's quote unquote right. You know, I will express and create, but only if I don't get hurt. You know, only if I don't risk getting hurt, you know, because you have to be vulnerable to do that. And people think that vulnerability is weakness, and it's not the same thing at all. I mean, the self-deprecating thoughts, the fear-based thoughts, the what if type thoughts, you know, that's the real work. You know, shifting your mindset in a way that, and it takes practice. People think that, you know, oh yeah, okay, now I know that, I'll just do that. It doesn't work like that. It's just like, you know, learning how to sing, or, you know, practicing a sport or anything else. You don't just learn the concept and then the next day you're a rock star. It doesn't work that way. It takes practice, and it takes thinking about it. It takes honing those skills, and how the mind works is no different. It takes daily practice. And I would wager that it takes more, if you had to weigh how much you should do each, you know, it takes more practice with your mindset and the mentality of what you're doing than it does the actual talent or skill.
Wow.
Than you're doing. People never think about it that way, but what's the one thing that always holds them back?
The mindset.
Not the talent.
Yeah.
It's the mindset. It's the way they think, you know. What if statements coming from a place of fear, you know, what if they don't like me? What if I fail? What if I don't get a good grade? What if I screw this up? We just have to switch what the what if is, you know. What if it's amazing? What if I do a great job? What if I have fun? What if I love this? We won't know till we do it.
Yeah. Are there any other practical things? You mentioned slowing down the breathing. I know you and I have talked about power poses before.
Oh yeah, power poses. There's if you want to have your students watch a video on that, there's a video by Amy Cuddy where that study was done. It's a TED Talk. You know, anything that brings you into a higher level of awareness and mindfulness for yourself. Focusing as opposed to being distracted before you have to do something. A lot of people think that one of the ways that they can get over it is to talk to a bunch of people and to, you know, kind of run around and busy themselves. But that actually ends up kind of taking your mental you know, capacity and spreading it in a bunch of different directions with a bunch of different stimuli. And so if you can find methods to allow yourself to focus, you probably remember the picture of Phelps' face, the one where he was prepping for one of his relays. And there's actually a video of this that's really kind of fascinating to watch, because in the video, he's got headphones on and he's kind of just sitting there and he is just laser focused. He's listening to music. It's kind of getting him kind of hyped up in the zone, and he is just laser focused, just eye-wise, like toward the ground. And there's swimmers like kind of like moving around. Some of them actually kind of get in his space, almost like an intimidating kind of thing. It's really, and he's just sitting in the chair. He doesn't look at them. He doesn't, like, it's not of any interest to him what other people are doing. And so it was interesting to see that, like, the person who was at the top was not the person who was talking to other people and trying to, you know, busy themselves and try to like intimidate or trying to play these mental games and stuff with other people. It was the person who was really sitting down, found the way to effectively focus for himself and to stay in the right mindset for what he needed to focus on when it came to execution. So that's a big part of it, you know, doing the prep work in a way that works for you. People learn in different ways. People learn at different speeds and different modalities. So you have to figure out what works for you and then create a plan based on that, right? Then, you know, before you do something, you need to have, you know, effective coping strategies, methods in place, you know, to give yourself the best opportunity. Focusing like that, breathing techniques, gross motor movement. It really depends on what what you experience. There's no one size fits all, because not everybody experiences things in the same way. Right. If your brain races, if you have racing thoughts and your brain's racing, then you need to either like count to yourself very slowly, or give yourself, if you tend to get distracted, give yourself, 1 to 2 things to focus on. Like if you try to think like, okay, I need to be musical and I need to keep the rhythm steady and I need to if you have this big list going in your head, most of the time people can't keep all that in their head. Then keep 1, maybe 2 things. Yeah. So if I was sight reading, like for me, it would be just like, keep a steady tempo. Mm-hmm. Like that's it. Go slowly. That would be it. Like go slowly, because the tendency would be, for many people to go too fast and they get ahead of themselves. Right. For me, when I would perform, even when I was performing, professionally and doing stuff all over the world, the only thing I would think about, because I'd done all the other work, I made sure that I had done all the other work, because the only thing I focused on was breath. That's it. Period. How I took inhalation. Because if that was in the right place, the rest was fine. So I didn't worry about like what my phrasing was like and what my words were and how I was going to interpret it and how it was going to look and whether or not I was going to do this here or do that, what the languages were, the high notes. I'd done all that work to ensure that when I was in the moment, because I would get nervous, I was in the moment, the only thing that I need to focus on is breath. Yeah. And so that ensured that, performances I was doing were successful, because I could rely on the one thing that was going to make or break, what happened after until the next one. Yeah. But that's different for everybody. That's what it was for me. It might be something, something else for someone else. Right. You pursue excellence in the work, but you don't expect a certain outcome and then attach that to self-worth or a meaning of success or something like that. That's not what it is. That's a lie. It's the great lie that perpetuates humanity. Mm. Is that somehow if you only do something in a certain way, or if it's perfect, that you're somehow successful, and if you don't, that you're not. Yeah.
So in preparing for anything, whether it's a performance or a test or anything that feels vulnerable, the mental work is to detach the outcome from your worth, essentially. If I don't get an A on this test, or if I don't get the part, or if I don't, make it past the audition, I'm not any less than. And
oh gosh, no, you're worthy simply because you exist. Now what? Yeah,
right.
It has nothing to do with that. Absolutely at all. I mean, it's just like I kind of equate it to like, and the picture I always get in my mind is like taking a briefcase to work. I know it's kind of like nobody does that anymore. Dating myself. But, if you think about it, like if you take a briefcase to work, and you open the briefcase at work and you do the stuff, and then, you put the work back in the briefcase. When you get home, you set the briefcase by the door and you go have your life, but you don't come home and say, I had a bad day at work and now I'm going to rub everything in the suitcase all over myself and roll around in it. And like, just, I'm just going to live in that. And you don't do the same thing also if it was a good day, right? You don't say I had a good day at work and I'm just going to wear all these papers and stuff all over me forever because it was good and this defines who I am. It doesn't, it's just like, it doesn't have anything to do. What you do is not who you are.
That's so.
And quite frankly, what you do, this is a little deep, and people have a hard time grasping this sometimes, but what you do actually doesn't matter. It's how you do everything. Mm. It's how you do. It doesn't matter. And we know this because we know people who are, we all know someone who is very high up in something that's unhappy, or that's just not a very nice person, or doesn't treat others well. And we also know people that are in what we would consider low positions, who are just the most beautiful souls on the planet. And those are the true gatekeepers, the ones who know that it's not what you're doing, it's how you choose to be in the world. It's how you do things. And I don't care if you're taking out the trash or singing, on the largest stage in the world. It doesn't matter. It's irrelevant. It's you think it's relevant because society has set it up like that.
Right.
To make you believe it's relevant, but it's not. and that's why people go on this crazy roller coaster throughout their life, thinking that like, oh, it's a big deal if I do this, but it's not a big deal if I do that. Oh, well, it's important if I do this, but it's not important if I do that. And their attitude is reflected in that.
Yeah.
Ultimately, you have to change your attitude.
Yeah.
We all have to change our attitude and realize that our attitude toward whatever we're doing, whether it's, like I said, taking out the trash, clean up your desk, or doing homework, or trying to figure out something that, you have to do that you don't feel like you're particularly good at, or doing something you're really good at, or, doing something that's really meaningful or fun to you, it doesn't matter. Mm. That the attitude that you have is a choice. And you can choose to attach your worth. You can choose to think that this thing is more important to that thing, but it's not.
I think some people might be tempted to take that and say like, well, I don't care. You know what I mean? To flip to the opposite extreme and go into something and be like, well, this doesn't matter at all. I don't care about this.
Yeah, I know. I agree. And that's why I say it's kind of hard to swallow. But what it really does is creates freedom for you.
Yeah.
And make you realize that you don't have to think that, you don't matter as much as this person because you're doing this particular thing, or that if you're not having a big stage career, and you're singing, in your community, that somehow what you're doing is less important, or has less value or less worth. That's not true. Saying that nothing matters and that you just shouldn't do anything is basically a reactive or a repressive nature, with that information, as opposed to saying, well, now that it doesn't matter, how would I do this? How would I do what I want to do?
Yeah.
How do I want to be in the world?
Yeah.
And not feeling like, somehow you're somehow, a victim of the system, or a victim of circumstances, or that it's not fair. Those are all very much prevalent ideas, but it is a choice.
Yeah.
It's a lack of awareness usually, and thinking that like, well, I just won't do anything. It's like, well, if people say that to me, I usually push back on them and say, well, are you really honoring your purpose if that's your attitude? Are you really stepping up, in service in some way to yourself, to others? Like I said, I didn't say who cares. I said, who cares what you do?
Well, I think you mentioned that word purpose, and it would take some people some time to maybe grasp that idea that everyone has a purpose, like that. Some people just would struggle with self-worth on that fundamental level, like before even does what I do matter. It's like, do I matter intrinsically?
Yeah. You want to get deep? I'll get deep. Okay. A lot of people struggle with the whole concept of purpose. And again, the issue that they struggle with a lot of times is that they're trying to tie it to something external. They're trying to tie it to their job or like what they do.
This.
Yeah, exactly. And then if I do it at this level.
Right.
Right. And so, anything. And, what I tell my clients that I work with, is, okay, number one, you're worthy simply because you exist. So that's off the table. Number two, if your only purpose on this planet, sole purpose, was to somehow help humanity evolve in some way, in any way, doesn't matter what it is, either by how you help them think, what you help them do, something that you invent, the fact that you help them to relax. There's all kinds of ways that we can help humanity to evolve. There's no one way to do that. You don't have to be a rocket scientist or, develop a cure for something. Those are very important things, but they're not the only way. Music is a healing modality for almost everyone. In some way or another. There's lots of different ways, that you can help humanity to evolve. But if that's your purpose, if that's your sole purpose, doesn't figuring out that all the different ways you could do that just become fun? And that it doesn't, and this is what I mean by it doesn't matter what you do. It's like your choices are limitless. You could do so many things. You could do different things throughout your life. You could, try things, and maybe they make you happy for a while, and then maybe you switch over to something else. I mean, that's what I did. I sang all over the place for 20 years, and that was great, and it made me happy, and it was fun, and I enjoyed it, and and then something else became just more important. Sometimes how we imagine things are going to turn out, or how we wish them to turn out, is it not exactly how they turn out? And again, that's not failure.
Yeah.
Is it? I mean, is that failure? I mean, I don't see it that way.
You said that there's no one way to do it, because so often we'll look at somebody that we admire successful and we'll try to follow their exact same path.
Yeah.
And, I know for me in my journey, I didn't, expect to end up here in the way that I did, teaching in high school. And that was completely like left field, and so different from, it's the only path that I know of that ended up in this way, in the way that it did, but I'm happy that I ended up here, and so it's just like, I think I gained a lot of freedom when I realized I don't have to follow that path to get to a place that I want. I don't have to follow somebody else. I can only follow my path. It's the only way that I can get there.
Well, and I think that, and again, this is taught to us by society and through culture and through all kinds of things, that we can only be happy if we fulfill this certain path.
Yeah.
That somehow our ability to be happy is tied to that, tied to this particular industry, tied to this particular career path, tied to this particular level, tied to this particular job title. Again, it's an illusion. It's something that was created that puts a lot of pressure on people. It contributes to that anxiety to perform, as opposed to coming back to that place where it says, well, if that wasn't an issue, how would I do this? Again, I'm not saying that you don't look at things logically. I'm not saying that you don't make a plan. You need a plan. I'm just saying that if the plan shifts, you didn't fail.
Right.
There's a big difference between saying, oh, well, it doesn't matter, so I'm just not going to make a plan. That's totally different. I'm not saying that you should just be lazy, and careless. That's an excuse, saying that it doesn't matter, so I'll use that as an excuse to, just watch Netflix all day, every day, is an excuse.
Yeah.
What I'm saying is that when it doesn't matter in that particular way, that you can continue to strive for excellence and to plan and to create and to execute without the pressure of, if it doesn't turn out this certain way, like we were talking about that attachment to outcome, if it doesn't turn out this certain way, then I somehow have failed and I can't be happy.
Right. So a person is practicing or preparing for something, they're putting in the work, but they're finding themselves getting very frustrated when they're not seeing progress.
Mm-hmm.
And so maybe they would be tempted to stop or just continue practicing, but the frustration increases, and then maybe the product quality decreases as the the frustration increases. So how do you approach that, and how do you deal with that?
I'd want to know what the process of practicing was like for that person, because oftentimes, again, we're attached to expectation in the practice process. We're not into process, we're into product, which means you're paying attention to the wrong things, which means you're practicing inefficiency, which means you're wasting your time. I would look at whether or not practicing was being seen as an exploration, as opposed to something that you just go through, go through the motions of. If you're just going through the motions, then you're saying you're practicing and that you're working hard, but you're not. And some people just aren't aware. They just don't realize that that's what they're doing. They think they're working hard, but they're not. They're just doing the same thing monotonously without thinking at all.
Yeah.
So it's mindlessness.
I did that for hours in the practice room. I would just, sing the same thing over and over again, and it didn't work. And then
and you're like, I'm working hard over here. I'm working hard.
Like that. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. And then you get frustrated because you're like, why is this not changing? Right. Why am I not having any progress? So 9 times out of 10, that's how someone is practicing and how they're approaching practicing in their mind.
Yeah.
I mean, you remember even when you and I first started working together, how I was like, you gotta change the way you think about what happens. You can't be worried about making bad sound. You can't be worried about making a mistake. You got to open your face and let something come out and let's see what that is.
Yeah.
Okay, we either like it or we don't like it. Either way is fine.
Right.
But let's see what it is, and then we can talk about it. If you're trying to make sure it's okay before it ever comes out of your face, you're late.
It's that self-permission to make any sense.
Yeah, exactly. It's the lack of expectation and the lack of judgment.
Mm.
What I always refer to with you guys is observe and report, right? Just observe and then report to yourself. Like, what did you observe? I mean, how many times do I say to people, like, what did you think about that? And they'd be like, I'm like, well, what are you doing then? What are you paying attention to?
Yeah.
What did you do? I don't know. Well, let's try again. And this time pay attention. So you start to realize oftentimes that you're paying attention to the wrong thing. Many people try to make sound, especially when they're working with a teacher. They will try to make sound, and the only thing they're paying attention to is what the teacher then says. And, my premise, of course, was always, if that's what you're waiting for, how are you going to practice the other 6 days and 23 hours of the week?
Yeah.
If you can't say to me, I liked that because, or I did not like that because, and I think what I'm doing is this, and let me try it again. If you can't do that because you want me to tell you, then you are not taking any responsibility, really. And your teacher is just enabling you at that point to do that. So, it really is about taking the responsibility of realizing that it's your voice, it's your work. You need to have a say in it. You need to be paying attention in a way that helps you to figure out what's going on, what's not going on. Then you can take that information into a lesson or to your teacher and be like, I was trying this and I was trying that, and I'm not quite sure what's going on here. And then the teacher can say, okay, let's hear that. Let's work on it. Let me see if I can help you out.
Right.
The teacher's job should not be able to just tell you what to do all the time and you mindlessly just stand there and absorb information and then go away. Your job should be to explore and to figure out what's working, what's not. Bring that to your teacher and let them help you with the places where you're stuck. Let them serve as a guide.
Yeah.
Not as an authoritarian figure that just tells you, what to do. Like, you don't have any thoughts yourself. Like, you can't, figure stuff out for yourself.
Yeah. Well, I think, one of the biggest things that shocked me when we first started working together is the idea of like practice being exploration, right? Because even if you record yourself on a voice memo, even if there's no other person in the room, you can listen back and be like, that's good, that's bad. You know what I mean? As opposed to, you introduce this idea of just playing around and making crazy sounds, and so still to this day, I'll be practicing and being like,
because you want to like, what am I doing while I do that? First of all, what am I doing while I do that? And then secondly, just being okay, like training yourself to be okay with something being less than ideal, less than your perception of perfection, something like that. When you listen to something, you say that's good or that's bad. I want to know how you repeat good. How do you tell your body, okay, be good again? And how do you tell your body, okay, don't be bad. Okay, so you heard it and you said that was bad. So what you're telling your body is don't do anything that just happened just now. Well, do you know what you did? No.
Yeah.
So how are you going to do that?
Yeah. Yeah.
You can't.
Feeling what's happening. Like, what is...
You're paying attention. You're paying attention to the wrong thing. You're paying attention to quality as opposed to paying attention to what is actually causing that quality.
Yeah.
Like, what is causing that quality to happen or not happen? And then what would I like to keep and what would I like to shift? What would I like to change? When you say, anytime you say something is good or bad, you're just wasting time, really.
Yeah.
You're not helping yourself learn at all.
Yeah.
I want to know why. Why did you, like I said, I shift that kind of language. Good and bad are things that we react to as people, and again, it goes from conditioning since we were children, right? When you're told you're good, you feel okay, right? You attach that to self-esteem, self-worth. When you're told you're bad, you don't like that, so you don't want to be bad again. Mm-hmm. Or maybe you rebel and you're purposely bad because you're frustrated, so we attach bad and good to things, I think, that are as a way of trying to label how we should feel about them. So I always tell people to shift those out for, I liked this because, and then you must say what it was. Like, so you have to be paying attention to do that. Or I did not like that because, what did you not like about that and why?
Yeah.
And you can't say things like, well, because the sound was bad. Now we're back to that again. I'm like, well, okay, why?
because it felt uncomfortable, or because
Right. And where did it feel
or
uncomfortable?
right.
Where did, was it, was the tongue pulled back? Was the jaw tight? Did the chest feel tight? Were you slumped over? Like, what were you doing? Why?
And then that leads down a thought process of things that you can actually adjust and change. You can't just not be bad, right?
Exactly.
But
That's what I'm saying. You can't, your body doesn't know how to do that. And when you do something, you say that was bad, that sucked, whatever. I want you to think about how the body reacts to that. Everything you just did, the body registers all of it as being, don't repeat that. Okay. Well, what if you took a really great breath? What if you really opened the body in a way that was great? What if you gave yourself a great foundation? What if the only thing you did was to pull back the tongue like this? And yet you just said that everything that happened was bad. So now you're trying to take that same breath again, but the body just got told that everything was bad. So it's trying not to take that breath. And now we've created hesitation in the body.
Yeah.
That manifests as tension, and you wonder why you can't move forward. You have to train your brain to have a thought process that comes to the forefront. Remember that, one of the reasons habits are hard to break is because when you learn a new habit or you learn new information, the body does what it knows best, not what it knows most recently, especially when you get into a higher pressure situation. Mm-hmm. So when you learn something new and then you go out and, stand up in front of somebody or go to a lesson or go to a performance or audition or whatever like that, and it doesn't happen, and then people get all upset. Well, that's because your body's going back to what it knows best. It's trying to hang on to that safety mechanism of go with what you know. Nobody goes into an audition and says, let's try that one thing we tried that's brand new that we don't know if it's going to work or not. Like, you just don't do that.
Except when you do and it never turns out well.
Well, from a survival, perspective, that seems like a really bad idea.
Yeah.
Right. And plus, it hasn't had the time to be ingrained in the body, and so that's why it happens sometimes. But if you are not practicing creating that new neural pathway, meaning that new piece of information or idea that you're sending to the body to tell it what to do, if you're not practicing that thoughtfully over and over again, then it's really hard to replace an old habit. Mm-hmm. You'll just revert to the other stuff. And this is in any area of life. This goes to, like communicating with other people. This goes to, making eye contact. It goes to, how you think about things before you take a test. I mean, it applies to everything, not just, music and practicing and performance. It really applies to everything. It's something that has to be practiced, and it's something that we have to keep in mind, that there is a level of self-compassion that's necessary while learning new things, while putting new processes into place. This is especially important for smart people. Smart people will tend to hear a concept, get an idea, and then just to assume that they should automatically assimilate it just like that. And when they don't, then they beat themselves up, give themselves a hard time. What's wrong with you? Why can't you do this? That kind of stuff.
I got so many comments from people who were like, I have this thing where if I'm not instantly great at something, I hate myself.
Right. There's many reasons for that. We are, especially with your age and younger, you guys all grew up with, instant connection to information. You wanted it. It came right back at you, with technology. And so there's that assumption that, you ask, you get. And, people had trouble with that with discipline sometimes, because like they're so used to asking and then just getting in return that when they ask for someone says you have to wait, it feels uncomfortable. Like, I don't want to wait. It's that feeling. And we get very impatient. And the same thing happens with ourselves, right? Especially if you're used to being able to do something right away, then all of a sudden when you can't, it's like that again, that you're somehow less than, that you're somehow mediocre or incapable or stupid, or, and none of that's true. Of course, what you have to realize is that you have figured it out. You understand the path of execution for it, but you are in a human, and the human may take a little bit longer to be able to coordinate that information that you're giving it. The example I always give to people are things like, I think about like twirling a baton, looks easy, Seems kind of simple. You sit there and twirl between your fingers. But if you've ever tried to do that and then thought, I know what I'm doing, and then started to like pick up the pace, you've hit yourself in the face with that thing and it hurts. You realize real fast that there's a little bit more to baton twirling than just flicking it around between your fingers.
Yeah.
And it'll smack you in the face, and it's the same thing with everything else. You've got to have patience in the process and kind of learn to delight in that and delight in the human's ability to need more time sometimes, rather than feeling like you're somehow failing or less than, if you can't get it right away. It's okay.
I messed up. I cracked. Silly body. That's okay.
Exactly. I'm like, what caused that? Like, what was I doing?
Yeah.
That made that happen. Because if you think about it, if your voice cracks or something, and then you're like, idiot, what's wrong with you? You're such a failure. And then you're like, let's try again. Your body's going to be like, oh, I'll try again. Like, no, I ain't going in there, and that's what happens. It's like, why would I want to try again when you just told me I was a horrible person when I tried a minute ago?
We abuse ourselves, really.
Yeah.
And then we try to keep putting ourselves back in the ring with our.
Yeah, it's a major recipe for self-hatred.
Yeah.
For self-loathing. And there's no reason for it.
Right.
There's absolutely no reason for it. Like I said, that is tied directly into that unrealistic expectation of consistent instant gratification.
Yeah.
That's all.
Yeah.
So if we can be a little bit more patient with ourselves and compassionate with ourselves and process, we can actually, and this is how I get my smart people and my perfectionists over this. So realize that if you will do those two things, you'll actually get better faster. So it's up to you. You can either beat yourself up and insist on being perfect and get better really slowly, or you can have self-compassion and you can go toward exploration of the process and realize that mistakes are just information, and you can get better exponentially faster. Up to you. You can take whichever path that you want to. In one of them, you'll be right more times than not, but it will be painstakingly slow.
Yeah. So
you decide. What's your time worth to you?
To produce when you're right, like that process is going to be so much slow. Right. You're
incredibly slow. Incredibly slow.
Yeah.
Because, and that goes back to how the brain works. Myelin is that gray matter in the brain, and it wraps around like insulation around an electrical current, like we have with power cords, right? We have those thick power cords, and that's just insulation around an electrical line is all that is, right? The rubber cord part that we see. If you cut it, right, you can see the electrical wires on the inside, and that's just insulation around that. Well, the brain works in the same way. When a neural pathway is created, that's basically just an electrical current that's created in part of the brain, sending information to other parts of the brain, the body. Myelin is that gray matter in the brain, and it actually wraps around those neural pathways that are created, creating an insulation of sorts around that electrical pathway. Now that's important because just like electricity, if there's no insulation, it's very erratic. Like we've seen lightning in the sky, right? And it can kind of go like this in all different directions, right? As opposed to when something is insulated, there's a very direct path, and it will stay in that path, and it will go faster in that path. And that's how we get better at things more quickly. Now, when you allow yourself to just do something for the sake of doing it, and to observe yourself doing it, and then to think about how you did that and what you want to do again, and whether you want to keep parts of that or do it differently, that's when myelin wraps in the brain. When you try to make sure that you do it correctly, when you try to make sure that, you don't screw it up, myelin doesn't wrap when you execute.
Wow.
At all. So that's why a person gets better so much more slowly, because that neural pathway, the insulation that helps it go faster and quicker and quicker and quicker, isn't there. Yeah. Like it is for a person who just try it out, and then get information, right? Those are the people that are going to get better the quickest. Mm-hmm. The ones who are willing to just go for it, try it out, see what happens. And then rather than
evaluate,
attaching themselves to the outcome, rather feeling good about themselves or feeling embarrassed or shameful or angry or whatever else, They just take the information for whatever it is.
Yeah.
You know, successful, not successful, liked it, didn't like it, good, bad, doesn't matter what it is, doesn't matter. It's information. And I'm going to take that information and decide what I'm going to do with that information. And then I'm going to try it again. That wrap smile in the brain is the quickest way you can get better at something.
How in your 20 years of performing, with all the ups and downs, did you stay inspired?
I think it really comes down to finding intrinsic motivation. I think it comes down to not doing it so that you get approval and acceptance, not doing it because people might like you, not doing it because you might get a good review, not doing it because it might get something else for you. Mm-hmm. So when you release that need to get in order to give, and you do it simply because you want to explore the context of what it is, explore the artistic components of whatever it is. I mean, I keep that general because it could be anything. It could be painting, it could be music, it could be performance, it could be teaching, it could be anything, you know. When you keep that at the heart, then your soul stays fed. You know, when you don't, it's like there's always an empty pit that you're constantly trying to fill. It's like a bottomless pit. And you need more and more in order to try to fill it. And so it becomes this kind of weird, codependent, roller coastery relationship where if you don't get something, all of a sudden you feel completely empty. Yeah. And if you do, then you're filled, but it's only temporary. So you're going to need that again. I just think it's dangerous. I think it's dangerous as a person. I think it's dangerous as an artist. I think it has to be something that gets filled from within you. And then that is what's allowed to go out into the world. That is what shines through you. That is what's shared with others, you know, and if other people want to pick up what you're putting out, great. If they don't, that's fine too. Like it doesn't matter whether it's something that they really like or they don't, you know, because that's always going to be the way it is. Art is a subjective thing. And should be, you know, it's just the way it is and will always be. And there's a beauty in that. There's a beauty in not liking everything the same, you know, and having things that you're drawn to or not drawn to for different reasons at different times in your life. So if it's not coming from that place of, you know, intrinsic motivation, that type of internal investigation, that type of, you know, wanting to satisfy your own curiosity for what exists and for what's possible, then it can get old really fast, you know. And you end up becoming, just like in any other job, you end up becoming a you know, feeling like almost like you're a slave to the industry or to the process or to whatever, as opposed to, you know, being in an industry, but living on your own terms, if that makes sense.
Right. So this information changed my life. It really did. And it continues to change my life. And I'm still working it out. And I think that's one of the reasons I continue to ask so many clarifying questions, because it's like, even, you know, when did we first meet? 2013? Even then, you know, I sometimes will encounter situations where you'll say something, I'll hear somebody else say something that flashes back to a lesson freshman year. And I'm like, oh my gosh, I get it. I get what it means now to not evaluate your sound as you're singing it. Or I get what it means to do this or do that. And it takes so long, like you said, to integrate that information. And we're all continuing to learn, whether it's physically in the technical aspect or mentally, right? Like,
yeah, I mean, it's always a perpetual journey. Yeah. And the more you delight in that, rather than thinking that like, there's going to be this arrival point where I've learned all I need to learn and now I can actually do stuff. I mean, that, like, the older you get, the more you realize that just doesn't exist. Yeah. Like, you learn things and then there's just always something new or always something more or always, you know, a shift or a change, or you grow and then there's something else. And if you don't enjoy it along the way, then that's kind of a bummer, because that's pretty much a majority of your time. Exactly. Everything else is just those little like snapshots in time, you know?
Yeah. And I love you've said this to me before, you know, when you go to perform, this has been so important for me. When you go to perform, you know, whether it's in an audition or a jury or a performance, it's just a snapshot in time. It's not, we want it to be a culmination of all of the work we've put in, but it's just how we are that day.
No, it can't. You talk about pressure. You talk about things that make
God.
you feel, something like performance anxiety, thinking that like everything that I've learned up to this point must come to fruition
Right now,
like
it's this moment.
right now. Exactly. Yeah. No, it's just a snapshot in time. It's a time for you to say, hey, let's see what I can do. Let's see
Today.
what I can assimilate from what I've learned today in this moment. And to see that as something to be excited about, regardless of what happens, because you'll learn from what happens regardless, and that's the gold, that's what allows us to keep moving forward and keep progressing in our lives in whatever way, so if you see it as that, then, that is success.
Yeah.
If you ask me, that is what success is. Success isn't a certain amount of money or a certain job title or a certain a level of career or being at the top of this or getting this role or something like that. I mean, there's nothing wrong with those things. Those things are all great, but to me, they are not the true definition of success. Success is much more about the journey and what happens along that journey and how you take things in and use things and think along that journey, as opposed to those little snapshots. Those are just cool times where we get to try stuff out and learn from them.
Yeah. And in terms of progress, you said that, like, when you look at a line graph, it looks like it's going like this, but when you zoom in, a lot more like this. And sometimes you find yourself on the day of a performance, like down there,
Yeah,
but
exactly.
that doesn't mean that you haven't come up from, where you were before, or you are down there. It's like in the whole perspective of your journey, you're still, on an upward trajectory.
Yeah, I find those moments, I mean, a long time ago I wouldn't have, but now, I really find those moments to be fascinating. And the reason I wouldn't have a long time ago is just because I didn't know better. Mm-hmm. But now I find them just to be fascinating, because it's like, this is where I'm at, or this is what's happening. I wonder what I can do in this state. I wonder what I can do, with this set of circumstances. And it becomes like this fantastic little laboratory, in which you can, just experiment and see what your capacity is, what your threshold is, as a human.
I think it transforms from like, I am a victim of my state today, or my mentality, or what's happening to me, or this person in this room, to empowering, like, okay, this is where I am today. Like, what can I do with that? How can I respond?
This person
Learned it from you. Oh wait, that's the wrong way.
No, now you're, you're on that one. Oh, you over here? Am I pointing to you now?
No, you were right before. I pointed out the window by accident. You're over there.
Oh, because on my screen, you're on the other side. So you're still pointing out the window.
No, really, what you're saying was so catalytic in my journey to just stay sane, first of all, in crazy art form. It's not crazy, but it can be very introspective, and you can feel trapped in that. But then move from just like surviving to actually enjoying the process is like another part of that journey, I think. And so thank you for, doing all this work so that we can, be empowered.
My pleasure. I am also one of my longest standing students. So I don't, everything I teach, I've and I coach on and I consult on and that I've written comes from wanting that knowledge for myself and then doing it myself, to go through that experimentation, say, well, does this work? Yeah. Is this viable? Is this true? So if I don't say it or put it out there if I haven't, if I haven't used it in some way myself. I think that's important, that if you're going to have ideas about the way things work, that you have to try them out.
Yeah.
And so, I speak to you and to anyone that listens to the things that I talk about from a place of great empathy and understanding because I didn't decide to just start teaching stuff about something. You know, I went through the process of experiencing it all myself. So I know what it feels like. I know what it's, what it's like to have all of those feelings, both, you know, physiological feelings, the mindset, you know, and to have to go through the process of shifting that, you know.
Yeah.
So it's a beautiful, you know, it's a beautiful experience to have come through a process like that, and then to be able to share stuff with others.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's so good.